After what Governor Charlie Baker admitted was a frustrating first day for people trying to sign up for a 75 and over COVID vaccine appointment, he's addressing at least one major complaint about the process, the lack of a phone line alternative to the online appointment system.
We agree with that, and that'll be happening next week. The phone piece is something I would have liked to have had ready, and we will soon. And I know it will make a big difference for people.
I certainly hope it will. Baker also said that tens of thousands of new appointments went live today, but were booked up quickly. And despite an additional 20,000 doses expected from the feds next week, the governor said we still won't have anywhere near enough for everyone who's eligible to make an appointment.
Believe me, we know that people want to get their shots as soon as possible, but we are asking people to have a little patience here. We can't expect that everybody's going to get vaccinated right away, tomorrow, the day after.
No, but Massachusetts has now fallen to 37th place when it comes to the percentage of population who've gotten a vaccine, according to the Washington Post. In a letter to Governor Baker this week, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley noted, quote, data released by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health shows Black and Latinx residents make up less than 3% and 4%, respectively, of those who have been vaccinated thus far, whereas white residents make up nearly 60% of those fully vaccinated. She said she found it incredibly troubling and urged him to, quote, update the state's vaccine deployment plan to address these inequities. Congresswoman Pressley joins me now. Congresswoman, it's good to see you as always.
Good to be with you, Jim.
So while those numbers are appalling, the governor announced in the last few days he's opening up a mass vaccination site at the Reggie Lewis Center in Roxbury. We know that he is committed to reserving 20% of doses to people of color and communities disproportionately affected. So what is he not doing on the equity front that he's got to do, according to you?
Well, Jim, first let me just say again, those sobering statistics that I provided, that I enumerated in that letter, you know, the fact that Black and Latinx residents would be getting vaccinated at a rate of 4% in comparison to white residents at 60%, when these are the communities that have been hardest hit. You know, I was early on partnered with Senator Warren to push for the adoption of our Equitable Data Collection Act. Some tenets of that were included in a previous relief package to mandate the collection of racial data. We knew anecdotally, history has shown us, that communities of color, marginalized communities, would be hardest hit because of the comorbidities of structural racism and unequal access to health care. And that certainly bore out when it came to infections, hospitalizations, and even fatalities. And so the fact that the communities that have been hardest hit, who should have been prioritized, are in such an anemic percentage is deeply troubling. This is as much about slowing the spread of the virus, particularly while we're in the midst of a surge and new variants are emerging, and quite literally about saving lives. The fact that we could rank 37th in the nation when we are a healthcare mecca and we have that existing infrastructure, we should be a pace setter for the nation, Jim. We should be a national model. We should not be lagging so frightfully behind. It's unacceptable. It's been delayed. It's been disorganized. And might I add, Jim, you know, I was particularly disturbed by the state's response to those that were 75 plus seeking to access the vaccine and sign up through the website. To be told persistence beats resistance is just insulting. You know, in representing the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, I'm hearing from residents throughout the district frustrated by the lack of access, and particularly for our elders. This particular instance that I'm elevating, you know, I have grandparents that are raising grandchildren, you know, up 5 hours, you know, trying to schedule an appointment. It's unacceptable.
Have you heard from Governor Baker after you delivered the letter?
I've not personally heard from him, but throughout the pandemic, I have personally been our staffs have been in communication with each other. And Jim, let me just say this. When I pushed the governor early in the pandemic on the crisis care standards, he reevaluated and they changed those standards. And so in this instance, that's why I'm pushing for the governor to recalibrate. And also, while Senator Warren, Markey, and myself sent a letter to the Department of Health and Human Services urging them to collect racial disparity data with the vaccine. We called for the collection of racial data early on in the pandemic in terms of infection rates, but now we need that for vaccine access so that we can course correct in real time.
You know, not only does it matter, you know this far better than I, how the governor performs, it also matters how the mayor performs, obviously, in the city you represent. There's likely to be a new one, Kim Janey, starting as soon as Marty Walsh is confirmed, assuming he will be by the Senate as Secretary of Labor. Are you contemplating endorsing in that race? There are going to be a lot of people running, as you well know. Are you going to endorse somebody before the runoff?
Well, first, let me just say, you know, I'm looking forward to partnering with Secretary Walsh in fighting on behalf of working families once he gets to Washington. I'm excited for the city of Boston. This is a historic time, and I'm going to do everything in my power to support Mayor Janey while she is in this role to ensure that she is successful. What I'm focused on right now, Jim, is ensuring that we have an equitable response to the pandemic, to vaccine distribution, and an equitable and just and robust economic recovery from the impacts of this pandemic on the Massachusetts 7th and throughout the Commonwealth. And so, although I'm very encouraged by early indicators of the Biden-Harris administration to actually have a national strategy when it comes to slowing the spread of this virus and tackling it, as well as a national vaccine strategy, which we were sorely lacking in previously, I'm still fighting. I'm fighting for relief for the Massachusetts 7th, and that's what I'm focused on right now.
Will you tell the people of Boston who you're voting for before they vote?
Jim, what I'm focused on right now is getting immediate relief to the families in the Massachusetts 7th, and that includes 2,000 reoccurring direct cash payments, rent and mortgage cancellation, and getting state and municipal aid to the Commonwealth. That has to be the priority for everyone.
You know, let's go from one life and death crisis to another life and death crisis. On January 6th, you were on the radio with Marjorie Egan and me shortly after this horror show. You said you were absolutely terrified. Shortly after, your husband, Conan Harris, came down with COVID-19, after you and your chief of staff had been stuck in that room, that secure room we've all heard about, where many of your homicidal Republican colleagues, I would argue, were not wearing a mask. How is he and how are you 3 weeks after?
First, I want to say thank you to the residents of the Massachusetts 7th and concerned residents throughout the Commonwealth and colleagues who extended well wishes and checked in on our family and were offering, mutual aid and care. Thank you very much. Conan is doing great. He's fully recovered.
Great. How about you? What's the after effect of having lived through that terrifying experience?
Again, when we first spoke about this, Jim, when people ask me if I was afraid, again, to be Black in America, to experience terror by those that seek to incite fear, who are white supremacists, is not new. That is a conflated part of my experience as a Black American. What I will say is that it is unfortunate that it took great injury, loss of life, a violent mob landing on the steps of the Capitol, terrorizing members of Congress, our staff, family members, custodial staff, food service workers, United States Capitol police officers, all in proximity. It took an insurrection of a violent white supremacist mob for many to realize for the first time, Jim, the threat that white supremacy is to every American and to our democracy. And so as committed as I am to ensuring that a breach like this never occurs again, which is why Donald Trump has been impeached twice by this Democratic majority-led House, we honored our oath. I'm calling on the Senate to honor their oath to impeach Donald Trump to ensure that he is barred from ever seeking public office again, for those members of Congress who aided and abetted in this insurrection by perpetuating this big lie, Jim, which was the foundation of this attempted coup to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, they must be expelled. And then, as you well know, within hours of this violent mob seizing our Capitol, I was the first member of Congress to call for a thorough investigation in my capacity on the Oversight Committee. Those investigations are underway by relevant congressional House committees. And we must know every individual and agency who enabled this insurrection, Jim, to hold them accountable, but also to ensure that it never happens again. And then, Jim, the hard work that we must do as a country and with the Biden-Harris administration is to root out the scourge that is white supremacy. It's not just about—
I want to talk about this. If I may, Congresswoman, you are more courageous than I. Speaking of scourge, you go to work every day with a congresswoman from Colorado who reportedly, a Republican, showed the insurrectionists around the day before to show what the pressure points were. A congresswoman from Georgia who, just to cite two things, when one social media follower wanted to hang Obama, she said the stage was being set. She liked a Facebook comment about Nancy Pelosi saying a bullet to the head would be a quicker way. Another congressman who tried to bring a gun onto the floor of the House where you work. How do you work in that kind of environment?
Well, Jim, this is exactly why it's very offensive when people are offering empty calls for unity. Unity at the expense of my very existence is a non-starter. These are dangerous individuals. Again, they are treasonous because they perpetuated this big lie which sought to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, ostensibly initiating a war against our country. And so these are not people that we should be looking to unify with, and we should not be quickly turning the page on that which occurred on January 6th. These are anti-maskers, in addition to those frightening statements that you've already offered. We have another who says that Sandy Hook didn't occur. These are conspiracy theorists. And that's their right to operate that way. But they certainly have no business being members of Congress. And again, they are a threat to our very democracy and even to our lives. So the scourge that we seek to root out must begin within the scourge that we seek to root out must begin within the hallowed halls and chambers of Congress.
Do you, by the way, very quickly, if you can, we've all read about the horrifying situation where your chief of staff discovered the panic buttons in your office had been torn out on Insurrection Day. Are you any closer to knowing why or who is responsible for that?
The investigation is still underway, so I can't comment further, okay, Jim. But what I will say is that the panic buttons have been reinstalled. That was certainly very unnerving.
And if I may, and if you said you were making the case for conviction in the Senate the other day, I think the math suggests and the statement and that preliminary vote suggests that's not going to happen. If Donald Trump is not convicted by the Senate, should he be prosecuted by criminal authorities for his behavior that day?
Jim, he certainly is culpable. He incited an insurrection, one that resulted in great injury to many, as well as loss of life. And the other thing is that any senator who has been complicit in that and not holding accountable someone who would incite an insurrection, they certainly should not be reelected. But moreover, I fear for us, because if there are not consequences and there is not accountability, what is the deterrent? This is as much about— Does Donald Trump belong in jail? I think that he has committed many crimes against mankind and certainly against his fellow citizen with the hapless way with which he governed, with callous disregard for human life. So, you know, Jim, at the end of the day, this is as much about accountability as it is about prevention. Mm-hmm. We do not want this to—
My apologies, by the way, the delay. My apologies for interruption. I'm not being as rude as I appear. There's a slight delay. You know, I want to show you a little video that I think is going to make you smile. This is Vice President Kamala Harris swearing in two men from Georgia, Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff. And that swearing in means a couple of things. One, it means, obviously, the Democrats have a majority, or at least a functional majority, with Vice President Harris breaking a tie. And it also means, for the first time in your career in Washington, that the legislation that passes the House will at least get a hearing in the Senate. So let's go to one of the things I know it's on the top of your legislative agenda, the elimination of the death penalty. We all know there was a rush to execute in the final days by Bill Barr and Donald Trump in the last 6-7 months. And there's a poll, I'm sure you've seen, Gallup poll, highest numbers ever from October, where the American public prefers life in prison over the death penalty, 60 to 36. But again, counting the numbers, I don't see there being enough Republicans, at least in the short run, to get to your goal and Dick Durbin's goal, your co-sponsor in the Senate. Do you see this as the beginning of a long battle, or are you more optimistic about the short run than I am?
Oh, Jim, I'm very optimistic. And the reason why that is because President Biden on the campaign trail said that he is opposed to the federal death penalty. This was reinstated under Trump's DOJ. And in the final weeks and days of his tenure, it was ostensibly a killing spree. We saw more individuals executed in those final weeks and days than have been executed in the last 6 decades. And so by executive action, I'm calling on President Biden to use the full authority with the stroke of a pen and to halt federal executions and then to resentence those 50 individuals that are currently on death row. I'm also calling on him to use his full clemency powers. And then on the legislative side, Jim, Senator Dick Durbin and I have reintroduced our bill to abolish the federal death penalty. And just to show you the kind of momentum, we have some 250 grassroots organizations around the country that have endorsed that bill, as well as our co-sponsors. Both in the Senate and the House. When we introduced that bill last year, Jim, we had about 20 co-sponsors. It's now quadrupled. We have over 80. And the most important thing, Jim, is Senator Dick Durbin is the chair of the Judiciary Committee. So I think with this momentum and with a commitment expressed by President Biden on the campaign trail, that our chances are looking good.
Well, I want to ask you about President Biden, though. I'm sure most people watching know that in 1994, when he sponsored the crime bill as a senator, he actually expanded the number of crimes that the federal death penalty would apply to. Obviously, you're right. He said he was against the death penalty on the campaign trail. It seems to me as an observer, the first test for President Biden is if he does what you suggest. He has the power to not pardon, he could pardon, commute the sentences of, I think it's the 49 people on federal death row, not let them out of prison, but reduce it to life in prison, possibly without parole. Is that something you're pushing hard on the Biden-Harris administration to do while your legislation is being considered?
Well, when it comes to the radical reimagining of our criminal legal system and righting so many of these wrongs and addressing our carceral state, it's not a matter of or, it is a matter of and. And so I am pushing on all of those fronts. Both for him to use the power of executive action to support our bill, to use the full power of clemency. But also early on, we sent them a letter about our People's Justice Guarantee, Jim, which is a radical reimagining of our criminal legal system, which seeks to decriminalize poverty, low-level offenses, mental health, substance use disorder, homelessness. And we offered them that as a framework for the advancement of bold policies.
You know, we only have a minute left, but I know that also high up on your agenda is eliminating student loan debt. It's a huge ticket, close to $2 trillion from what I understand. And also ensuring that the $1,400 additional on top of the $600 promised to Americans by not just Democrats, but at least a handful of Republicans in this last election becomes reality. Barack Obama was criticized for waiting too long to attempt to reach bipartisanship on a whole host of things. Do you worry that Joe Biden's desire, this is what he campaigned on, to reach across the aisle, unlike anybody else can, is going to frustrate the ability to pass some of the things that you consider to be urgent, and we have a minute left.
I'm going to push this administration to be responsive to the needs of the people who elected them, to meet the needs of the most marginalized who made it possible for democracy to breathe another day. And that includes $2,000 reoccurring cash payments, Jim, amongst many other things. We have a decisive mandate from the people to advance bold, progressive policies. And these are populist policies, to be clear. At the end of the day, I think the ultimate tool of persuasion is impact. And canceling student debt, which is a nearly $2 trillion crisis where individuals are saddled with a minimum of $30,000 worth of debt. This is a racial and economic justice issue. It's critical to a economic recovery, a robust one from this pandemic. These are popular ideas, and they will start the process of mitigating the hurt and harm caused by the Donald Trump administration, but also the nagging and entrenched inequities, disparities, and racial injustices that have persisted for decades.
I'm so glad that you and your husband are well. It's very good to see you, Congresswoman. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jim.